Is being a good person the biggest lie you believe? Let me start with a question that might make you uncomfortable. What does it really mean to be a good person? Think about it. How do you define goodness? Is it following the rules, helping others, being liked, or standing up for what's right? Most of us carry this vague yet persistent idea that being a good person is the ultimate goal in life. Society rewards it, religion preaches it, and even our personal relationships depend on it. But what if I told you that this idea of goodness might be the biggest lie you've ever believed? What if being a good person is just a cage one designed not to free you, but to control you? Here's where things get interesting. George Orwell, in his classic works like 1984 and Animal Farm, warned us about the dangers of ideas that are presented as universally good. He showed us how easily those ideas can be twisted, how power structures manipulate them to control individuals and suppress dissent. And when you think about it, isn't this exactly what happens when we cling too tightly to the idea of being a good person? We become imprisoned by it, constantly trying to meet some arbitrary standard of goodness that we didn't even define for ourselves. We're left asking questions like, am I doing enough? Am I good enough? And worst of all, what will people think if I'm not? Let me ask you something: who benefits from this constant self-policing? It's not you. When your life revolves around being good in the eyes of others, you give away your power. You let other people, institutions, and even societal norms define your actions, your thoughts, and your worth. Nietzsche, one of the most profound philosophers in human history, called this the morality of the herd. He argued that most people blindly follow the values handed down to them by society, never stopping to question whether those values actually serve them or if they're just tools of control. Are you living your life according to your own principles? Or are you just trying to avoid judgment?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Here's the paradox: the more you try to be good by external standards, the more you lose touch with what's truly right, meaningful, and authentic in your own life. For example, think about the concept of self-sacrifice. We're told that putting others first is the ultimate sign of goodness. And yes, helping others can be noble. But when it becomes compulsive, when you sacrifice your needs, your dreams, even your identity just to be seen as good, is that really virtuous? Or is it self-betrayal? Orwell warned us about this kind of manipulation in Animal Farm, where the animals worked harder and harder, believing they were building a utopia, only to realize they were enslaving themselves. The same thing happens to us when we blindly pursue goodness without questioning who defines it or why. Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine you're in a workplace where standing up for yourself might get you labeled as difficult. Maybe your boss is overstepping boundaries, or a colleague is taking credit for your work. But instead of confronting it, you stay silent, telling yourself, I don't want to create conflict. I want to be a good team player. In that moment, your desire to be good becomes your prison. You're not standing up for what's right, you're avoiding discomfort. And this avoidance doesn't just hurt you, it reinforces a toxic system that thrives on people staying silent. So here's the big question: what if being a good person isn't about always being nice, agreeable, or selfless? What if real goodness requires something deeper, something messier, riskier, and far more authentic? Orwell believed that true freedom comes from questioning the narratives we're fed, especially the ones that seem the most virtuous on the surface. That to break free from the trap of being a good person, we need to ask ourselves, who benefits from my compliance? What values am I serving? And are those values worth serving? The uncomfortable truth is that being a good person, as society defines it, often means being a passive person. It means prioritizing harmony over honesty, niceness over justice, and approval over authenticity. But real goodness, the kind that transforms lives and changes the world, isn't passive. It's active. It's messy. It requires courage. And sometimes it requires being seen as bad by people who benefit from the status quo. Think about the great figures in history who've inspired change. Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Malala Yousafzai. Do you think they were concerned with being good in the conventional sense? No. They were willing to disrupt, to make people uncomfortable, to challenge deeply entrenched systems of power. That's what real goodness looks like, not blind compliance, but conscious resistance. So, I'll leave you with this question: what would your life look like if you stopped trying to be a good person and started trying to be a free person? In the next part, we'll explore what it means to redefine goodness on your own terms and why doing so is the most liberating choice you can make. Redefining goodness, the courage to live by your own principles. Let's take a moment to confront something most of us avoid. What if the way we've been taught to think about morality is fundamentally flawed? For generations, we've been conditioned to equate goodness with obedience. Be polite, don't rock the boat, follow the rules. But here's the uncomfortable truth: rules are often written by those in power to serve their own interests, not some universal moral code. George Orwell warned us about this in 1984, where language, truth, and even morality were twisted to keep people compliant. When you blindly follow the rules of goodness without questioning their origins, you risk becoming a pawn in someone else's game. That's why redefining goodness on your own terms isn't just a rebellious act, it's a necessary one. But here's the challenge: redefining goodness means stepping into the unknown. It means rejecting the comfort of societal approval and learning to trust yourself instead. And that's terrifying, isn't it? Because for most of us, our sense of morality has been outsourced to external authorities: parents, teachers, religious leaders, governments. What happens when you strip all of that away? Who are you when no one is telling you what's right or wrong? Nietzsche would call this the moment of the death of God, not necessarily in a religious sense, but in the sense of losing the external structures that once gave your life meaning. It's a crisis, but it's also an opportunity to rebuild something truly authentic. Let's explore what this might look like in practice. Imagine you're faced with a moral dilemma. Let's say you witness a friend or colleague doing something unethical, like stealing or lying. The conventional idea of being a good person might tell you to report them immediately because following the rules is the right thing to do. But is it really that simple? What if the context matters? What if their actions, while technically wrong, were born out of desperation or injustice? What if reporting them would cause more harm than good? The point here isn't that there's a clear answer, it's that real morality requires thinking critically and taking responsibility for your choices, not just defaulting to what society says is right. This is where courage comes in. Redefining goodness means being willing to make decisions that might not win you applause from others. It means living by principles that resonate with your deepest values, even if those principles make you unpopular. Orwell understood this well. In 1984, Winston Smith's rebellion was not about grand gestures or public heroics. It was about reclaiming his own mind, his own truth. That's what real courage looks like. It's not about being fearless, it's about being willing to stand alone when necessary. But let's be clear, this isn't an excuse for selfishness or moral relativism. Redefining goodness doesn't mean abandoning empathy or care for others. In fact, it requires more empathy because it forces you to engage deeply with the complexities of human behavior. It's easy to follow a rule book and call yourself good. It's much harder to look at a messy, morally ambiguous situation and make a choice that aligns with your values, even if no one else understands or agrees. That's why Nietzsche believed in the concept of the Übermensch, or the overman, a person who creates their own values and lives by them with integrity. To Nietzsche, this was the highest expression of human potential. So, how do you begin to redefine goodness for yourself? Start by asking deeper questions. What do you truly value? Not what society tells you to value, but what feels meaningful to you at a core level. Is it honesty? Justice? Compassion? Freedom? Once you've identified those values, the next step is to test them against your actions. Are you living in alignment with what you claim to believe, or are you letting fear, convenience, or the desire for approval dictate your choices? And here's the hardest part. Are you willing to change your actions when they don't align with your values? This process is uncomfortable because it requires radical honesty with yourself, but it's also liberating. When you stop outsourcing your morality to others, you reclaim your power. You're no longer trapped in the endless cycle of trying to please the world, and you discover something extraordinary: the freedom to live a life that feels true. So let me leave you with this question: what values would you live by if no one was watching? In the next part, we'll explore how aligning your actions with your personal values can transform not just your life, but the world around you. Living your truth also requires humility. It means acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, that your values might evolve over time, and that you'll make mistakes along the way. But here's the thing: mistakes made in pursuit of authenticity are far more valuable than perfection achieved through conformity. Why? Because mistakes teach you. They help you refine your values, deepen your understanding, and grow into a more complete version of yourself. Nietzsche called this process self-overcoming, the idea that the highest form of human existence is one where we constantly challenge and improve ourselves. Living your truth is not about being perfect, it's about being willing to grow. But here's the paradox: living your truth is not easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Why? Because truth, by its very nature, is uncomfortable. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that you'd rather ignore: the contradictions, the fears, the insecurities. And when you make the decision to live authentically, you'll inevitably face resistance from the world around you. People might question your motives, criticize your choices, or even reject you entirely. Why do they do this? Because your authenticity threatens their comfort. It holds up a mirror to the ways they've compromised, conformed, or betrayed their own values, and that's terrifying for most people. Here's a question to consider: what price are you willing to pay for truth? It's an uncomfortable question, but it's also a necessary one. Because the moment you decide to live with integrity, you'll find yourself at odds with the status quo. And that's okay. George Orwell warned us about the dangers of conformity, not just in political systems, but in the way we live our everyday lives. In 1984, the protagonist Winston Smith wasn't just rebelling against a totalitarian regime, he was rebelling against the idea that truth could be dictated by someone else. By refusing to accept the lies of the society around him, Winston reclaimed a piece of his humanity. And that's what living your truth is really about: reclaiming your humanity, your agency, your freedom. So, how does this work in practice? It starts small. Integrity isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, it's about the choices you make every single day. When you notice a disconnect between your actions and your values, do you adjust or do you rationalize? When you're faced with a difficult decision, do you choose the path of least resistance, or do you choose the path that aligns with your principles, even if it's harder? These are the moments that define your character, not because anyone is watching, but because you are watching. Living your truth, how personal integrity changes the world. Let's go deeper. Imagine for a moment a world where every individual stopped striving to meet society's arbitrary standards of goodness and instead committed to living their own truth. What would that world look like? Would it be chaotic, as many fear a free-for-all where people abandon all morality? Or would it be something far more profound, a world where people take responsibility for their own integrity, where actions are guided not by fear of judgment, but by an inner compass that points toward authenticity, courage, and connection? Nietzsche believed that individuals who create their own values are the ones who truly shape history. And maybe, just maybe, the act of living your truth is the most revolutionary thing you can do. And here's the ripple effect: when you live with integrity, you create space for others to do the same. Think about it. How many times have you been inspired by someone who had the courage to stand up for what they believe in, even when it was unpopular? Their authenticity gave you permission to question your own assumptions, to think more deeply, to act more boldly. This is how personal integrity changes the world, not by forcing others to follow your example, but by showing them that it's possible to live authentically, even in the face of resistance. So, let me ask you this: what would happen if you stopped waiting for permission to live your truth? If you stopped asking, "Will this make me a good person?" and started asking, "Does this align with my values?" In the next part, we'll explore how this shift from goodness to authenticity can create a life of deeper meaning, connection, and fulfillment for you and for those around you. From approval to authenticity, finding meaning beyond goodness, let's take a moment to reflect on something profoundly human: our desire to be liked, to be accepted, to be seen as good by others. This craving for approval is deeply ingrained in us. It's tied to our survival instincts, to our history as social creatures. But here's the paradox: the more you chase approval, the further you drift from your authentic self. And when your life becomes a performance for others, you lose something irreplaceable: your ability to create meaning on your own terms. Here's the question we must confront: what does it cost you to seek approval? Think about it. How many times have you said yes when you really wanted to say no? How often have you hidden your true thoughts to avoid conflict? How many dreams have you set aside because they didn't fit the mold of what others expected from you? These small compromises may seem harmless in the moment, but over time, they chip away at your sense of self. Orwell warned us about this in 1984, how the erasure of individuality, even in small ways, leads to a loss of freedom. And isn't that what happens when you live for approval? You trade your freedom for acceptance, your authenticity for applause. But here's the truth: the approval you seek will never be enough. Why? Because it's external, it's fleeting, it's conditional. And worst of all, it's not really about you, it's about the version of you that others want to see. The only way to find lasting fulfillment is to stop chasing approval and start building a life rooted in authenticity. This means shifting your focus from "what do they think of me" to "what do I think of me?" It's a simple question, but it's revolutionary. Because when you live in alignment with your values, when your actions reflect who you truly are, you stop being a prisoner of other people's expectations. Does this mean you should reject connection or disregard others' feelings? Of course not. Authenticity isn't about selfishness, it's about honesty. It's about showing up as your whole self, not the sanitized version you think others want. And when you do this, something incredible happens: the relationships you build become deeper, richer, more meaningful. Why? Because they're based on truth, not performance. So, let me leave you with this: what would your life look like if you stopped trying to earn approval and started living in alignment with your truth? Because in the end, The pursuit of authenticity doesn't just free you, it inspires everyone around you to do the same.